Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Joseph Scull. Joe has deep experience managing functions like real estate, operations, and procurement, and sometimes all three at once at the enterprise level. So, hi, Joe. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Hi, Kelly.
So before we dig in and talk a little bit about our main topic today, I talked about the fact that you have experience working in different functional areas, sometimes combining their interests. What else is it helpful for people to know about your professional background?
I think I've just been able to take advantage of any opportunity. Sometimes the things people don't really like to do open the greatest doors for you. So I think, really take advantage when you have the chance to learn and do new things.
Awesome. Now, you and I had a conversation leading up to this one today where you had talked about the importance of processes, even more so potentially than having direct contact with people, even more so potentially than results, but that it's the processes that procurement creates and then rolls out into the organization that ultimately form people's impressions of us as a team. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think in procurement in particular, a lot of times procurement does not have a positive perspective tied to it. I think it's important that people understand, one, why you're creating processes, but two, when you have a process, it gives everybody the ability to understand what has to happen, right? I think the biggest roadblock in procurement tends to be if someone starts down the road of, I have to find a new supplier, and doesn't realize that there are 4 or 5 steps that have to happen during that journey. Mm-hmm. And it's not just, hey, we found these guys, we think they're great, we want to bring them on board. You have 2 weeks, right? So if the processes are outlined and everybody understands what they are, you really get to be able to become a partner with the business and be able to say, hey, we can help guide you through this process. Some of this we're very good at. We can help you with and take the administrative work away. But you might be the subject matter expert that we really need your help to understand why we're doing it, what the right approach is for our firm, and those kind of things. So I think having a process, any process really, that everybody knows and understands is a helpful starting point to have a good relationship with the business you're supporting.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting too, because I think a lot of times the reason the business waits until the last minute like that is because, well, they might be afraid we're going to say no. They might be afraid we're going to slow them down. They don't really want to go through that process. And they think to themselves, they're just concerned about savings. But there are actually a lot of different business objectives that procurement is focused on achieving. Savings is definitely one, but risk is up there as well. To what extent are those objectives, the multiple objectives that we're trying to satisfy, part of procurement's process, but also how our teams are structured? And maybe that's a piece of what the business needs to understand a little bit more about.
Yeah, I think, we started in my past life with a very small procurement organization where you obviously can't take on everything. So you have to use outsourced partners. You have to rely on the risk group and all those different things. But especially in large enterprises, everything tends to be siloed, right? So you may have a supplier that already does exactly what you're looking for in another region or in another city. And as a small part of the business unit, you may not even have any idea. So I think from a risk perspective, it's helpful to have the real procurement team involved because they hopefully have some attachment to all the other business units and are able to say, actually, we have a corporate contract, so you could just jump on quickly with a statement of work as opposed to starting over. So I think the visibility, it's a point that they can help with, and also the risk. If the procurement people see the contracts every day, they at least kind of know what industry standard is. The business may be the subject matter expert, but they may not have dealt with the actual contract and the clauses and the regulatory piece of it that's required in any of the public companies. So I think it really is the partnership of trying to find the right balance of relying on the business, making sure they're your client at the end of the day, right? You want to help them. You want to help them save money. And at the end of the day, if you're both part of the same organization, ultimately, hopefully it's the same goal.
Absolutely. Now, one of the other structures, or I guess process, we could look at it that way as well, that tends to come into question and can sometimes bring out a lot of emotion from people is when procurement starts talking about the budgetary process, about the work that we do with the business that hopefully helps them meet or exceed the expectations set by the budget. Can we use budgets and the budgetary process as a way to incentivize the business to work with us without necessarily making them concerned that we're going to be, let's say, drawing off anything that they're able to save, effectively shrinking their budget? How can we make sure that the use of the budget and discussion of the budget is a net positive for procurement and for the business?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part of it is you have to be honest with the business that you're not just looking for the lowest cost supplier, right? Because the lowest cost is not always the right answer. But at the same time, if you're in a large organization, you do want procurement to be able to leverage your entire buying power, right? So if you're able to identify, actually, we have two other teams that could use the same product, we could get you a better deal. And even without you using as much of your budget, we may be able to create a surplus that you could use for your other initiatives, right? Or if you want it to be a save in your budget, then it's a save. But at the end of the day, it has to be in alignment. In my view, generally the budget's owned by the business, right? They're responsible. Procurement should be used as a tool to help them stay within their target, if not beat their target, but not have a concern that the procurement team is going to have the final say on how they utilize their budget.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked about a lot of examples where procurement is trying to do outreach to the business to help them understand how we can support them. But there may also be times in the course of events where the business actually may need to come to procurement, and even better, to find that they have a friend in procurement willing to help them through the situation they find themselves in. What are some examples of times like this where, either good or bad, right, opportunity or challenge, the business might proactively reach out to procurement and say, are you the ones to help me with this?
Yeah, I would say, oddly enough, the most common one is actually when the business is having trouble with the supplier, right? And the business has to work with those suppliers every single day to complete their operational processes, where procurement really only has to come in, monitor, help with a new contract, and those kind of things. So it's often helpful that procurement can be the bad guy to really help get your suppliers in a good spot, right? Hey, we're having some service challenges. Procurement would like to discuss what our KPIs are and how we look at that. So it kind of gives the business the ability to stay out of the mix where they don't have to be the bad guy because they have to deal with them every day. So then procurement can come to the table and kind of good cop, bad cop. Hey, we really need this fixed, or we may not be able to continue on here. And the business can say, we work together a lot. We really want to fix it. We just have to make sure we keep procurement at bay and happy. So it does help you as a tool to manage your suppliers without having to jeopardize the relationship that you need on a working level. That's probably the most common one.
Well, and I like the idea that you sort of bring in that model of like good cop, bad cop, because I think procurement has enough experience dealing with performance issues, certainly, but these types of high stakes conversations where we can come in and in a way start in the role of bad cop, but actually step very quickly into the role of mediator, because chances are it is not completely isolated as a supplier problem. There could be an issue in terms of how the business is working with them. It could be things beyond the supplier's control in a market or in the supply chain. And so it becomes one of those opportunities to be tough, right? You certainly have to be able to address the working issues that are taking place, but be solution oriented enough so that we're saying, okay, let's put all of our cards on the table. What is the true issue here, right? Give the supplier the opportunity to explain from their point of view, and hopefully ultimately be able to resolve that issue instead of having to go through the process of parting ways with that supplier.
Yeah, and I think procurement's also a resource, right? The biggest challenge for the business is they may not have time to dig into every detail around the administrative piece of procurement. They have a job to do every day, and this is really on top of their day-to-day work. So if procurement can come in and help out, they really can be a resource to save the business time and energy as well.
Now, if in one of those cases where there's been a performance issue with a supplier, procurement is able to step in, and whatever the resolution is, procurement is able to use their skills and expertise and time to get the business there. What is the next step? How can we build on that experience to make sure that we stay more connected with the business, that they come out of that experience having a fuller understanding of the type of partnership they can enjoy with procurement and the sorts of things we can offer? It seems to me like that would be a really good relationship building or deepening opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the maturity of your procurement function, right? Maybe you don't have KPIs in place on all of your contracts. Maybe you don't have quarterly reviews. And again, going back to time, the business may just not have time to do that. And they say, oh, well, we talk to them every day. But you may not be taking a step back to look at the overall relationship to say, everything's fine, but actually these guys offer 10 other services we could use, and we can consolidate suppliers, which can be a win for both the supplier and the business. Just stepping out of the day-to-day responsibility, once you have that trust with the business, they do open the doors a little more for you to work together, and you might be able to bring more benefit to them, where you break down that wall of them being worried that you're just coming in looking for the lowest cost supplier.
And that's an opportunity, because certainly it's a challenge. I always find creative work to be the most challenging, because you're not just following a process. You're thinking, okay, what else does this supplier provide? Or how could we make this contract work for us better? But along with that comes the greatest opportunity. And so I think what you're saying is that while the business will often come to procurement for help with a very narrow set of circumstances, the results that we choose to create through that point of engagement can be so much more than what the business is directly asking for.
Yes, definitely. And, and it's word of mouth too, as well, right? You have a good situation with one business, then the kind of aura of procurement just coming in to save money and take the lowest. People start to understand, oh, actually, they worked with us on this project and it went really well. They can really help you and save you some time. So just like anything else, kind of the reference is more powerful than almost anything.
Yeah, and that's a challenge, because that's where procurement is in this situation of somewhat being an inside consulting arm, right? And you talked about maturity levels. So certainly there's different levels of resource that people would associate with working with procurement. But if you have some kind of good experience, you do want that word to get spread internally. But it's not as simple as being a third party that says, hey, if you had a good experience, would you review my services? Would you, give me some positive feedback? Where it's internal, it's almost hard for procurement to ask for that, even though it's the most important thing that could potentially come out of that interaction.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to be creative in that, Mm-hmm. Often, hey, it was a big win or a good solution. Generally, that will get escalated somewhere.
Yeah.
Because if there was that big of a problem, people were aware of it, right? So if you can get the upward kind of word around that, hey, they did a good job here, then it also helps you to have support at the higher levels of the organization, which in turn hopefully gets you more resources. Then the more resources you have, or the better efficiency you have, the more you're able to help out. So then it kind of becomes part of your culture. Mm-hmm. Right. I think that's the biggest thing when you're trying to introduce procurement to a culture the first time. It's difficult, right? Everybody's nervous of, why do we have these guys? Why are they looking at what we're doing? This is our business. So if you don't come at it from an angle of, we are a customer service team, we're here to help you, you're really kind of dead in the water. You have to start with that relationship building, because otherwise you end up in these territorial situations where you don't have the full picture. You don't understand exactly how you're working with that supplier. And then, more often than not, you're going to miss the mark.
I appreciate your point about the territorial situation, because especially when procurement is relatively new, I think everybody tends to respond to it as, great, you've brought in this team because we were all doing the wrong thing. And now they're going to make us go slow, and they're going to make us do it their way. Whereas a great piece of advice I received from somebody along the way was something like, there's always enough credit to go around. So if something goes well, it may end up being a situation where procurement needs to tell the success story themselves. But if you can loop in that business point of contact and make sure that the role they played, that they get credit for even bringing the issue to procurement, noticing there was a performance issue, doing something to escalate that. It almost opens the door to procurement being able to talk about their own successes internally, while not sounding braggadocious, because nobody wants that either. But if we spread the credit around, we're telling a bigger story, giving credit to more people, and hopefully even helping that word travel a little bit further about the value that can come from a partnership with procurement.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the reality is, depending on the scope of your procurement work, you're not going to be the subject matter expert in 8 out of the 10 areas you're working on. You really need that partnership with the people who do it every day. IT has some of the largest contracts, some of the most difficult. If you don't have a partnership with the business or a dedicated IT sourcing person, you're going to have challenges, right? So it's free resources for you to work with the business, because they understand the nitty gritty, and that helps you be able to provide a better outcome for everyone.
Absolutely. So, Joe, as we start to wrap up this conversation, I want to bring you in on a tradition we have here at the Sourcing Hero. So I'm going to give you a pairing of questions. You can choose either one to answer, and there are no wrong answers here. So any thoughts that you have in response to the question that you pick are fine. Your options are, what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
I think heroism in a business context is really trying to be able to focus on the business and not yourself. Yeah. It's really kind of, it's a fine line, right? You want to promote yourself, and not that you get more responsibility and that kind of stuff, but you really have to keep it in the perspective of what's best for the business, and make sure you follow those right guidelines and those right paths. And if you do that, I think things generally end up pretty well for everyone.
Excellent. Well, Joe, I so appreciate you being here to share your experience and your point of view. If people have listened into our conversation and appreciate the things that you've had to share, what is the best way for them to get in touch or to connect with you?
Probably LinkedIn. I've been pretty active on LinkedIn these days, so that's probably the best place. And, it's helpful for me to meet people in the network as well.
Awesome. So if you're listening in, please reach out and connect with Joe. We'll make sure there's a link to his LinkedIn profile down in the show notes. And Joe, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well, and always remember that you can be a hero too.